I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. This is Melbourne Conversations as part of the 2016 Spring Fashion Week, Melbourne Spring Fashion Week. And of course we thank the City of Melbourne and RMIT Design Hub for hosting tonight's discussion. The panellists tonight are Lisa Barron, Mark Daynes, Robyn Healy and Cassandra Wheat. So our first guest is fashion designer Lisa Barron. Welcome, Lisa.
Good evening.
It's not often that the Australian fashion landscape sees an independent fashion house reach 33 years of age, especially one that holds steadfast to the values of its inception as the industry morphs and folds around us. Lisa has an unwavering dedication to quality, originality, and especially local manufacturing. So, Lisa, I'm going to ask each guest how the moment they realised they wanted to work in fashion.
I think, and I have thought about this question, I think the moment came probably in the late 70s. I'm from Perth, Western Australia, and I haven't told too many people this, but I used to like punk music, and I needed a leopard skin miniskirt to wear. And do you think I could find a leopard skin miniskirt in Perth? And no. Jeanswest wasn't around then. Oh no, you were. You were, sorry, but you weren't doing leopard skin miniskirts. You should have. You would have had a customer.
I wasn't, but we...
So I started to make my own bits and pieces, and then, you know, I had friends who were in bands who would say to me, "Oh, can I have one of those shirts?" and that I'd made, and I couldn't do buttonholes, so I made shirts with zips. And you know, I just realised that, yeah, I think this is something I could do. And so that's pretty much how I started. And should I go on with the journey?
And your education?
Okay, so I went to Bentley Technical College in Perth, and I did 2 years. Then I got a bit bored. Sorry, it wasn't RMIT. I wouldn't have left if it was RMIT. I think
there've been a few that got bored at RMIT too. Lee Bowery. He only lasted 6 months.
Oh. So I'd saved up $500 by then. So I thought, yep, I can head over to the big smoke, to Melbourne. So I had $500, portable sewing machine and a car. It wasn't a great car, but it was a car. And I arrived in Melbourne and I found an apartment in South Yarra for $40 a week, which wouldn't that be nice today? And the best part about it had a freestanding garage out the back, which I quickly commandeered as my new headquarters. And it had one PowerPoint, which was great. So I could run the light, the sewing machine, the overlocker, and in winter the heater and the iron. It was a lot of juggling, but so I managed to, I went to Victoria Market, bought some fabric, whipped up a few little pieces and wandered down Chapel Street, and with all in a garbage bag. I wasn't into presentation then, it was in a big black garbage bag, and went into a few different stores. Would you like to look at my dresses? And most of them just kind of shooed me away, but many of you know the wonderful Joe Solito, who had the Solito shops in Chapel Street. And Joe was an absolute darling, and he said, "Sure, love, let me have a look." And he said, "Yeah, they look all right. Leave them here. If they sell, I'll pay you next week. Come back next week." And so I went back the next week, and that all sold. So he said, "Make me some more." And so I made some more, and so that's pretty much how I got started. It was very organic, and I called Chapel Street my agent, because a lot of other boutique owners would see my product in Joe's stores and they would ring me and say, "Can we have some of those?" So it kind of just was a really easy start. But I must add, when I came over with this sheer enthusiasm, I didn't realise Victoria was in a recession. I didn't even know what recession meant.
So we're 1983, 84?
Yes, 83, 84, 83, early 83. I didn't know what a recession was. So sometimes that...
It was a recession we had to have, wasn't it?
It was, I think it was. And that's where I invented the word obliviousm. Oblivious optimism. It works every time, and I still use it. The less you know sometimes, the better.
So you were working on consignment. So basically you were putting stock into the store, and you got paid if they sold.
Yes.
So you were acting as the store's banker.
Yes.
So, and then you started wholesaling?
I started wholesaling, so when people would ring me, because I also looked at that as a great opportunity from Joe to offer to put my clothes in. It was a good market tester. So when the boutiques would ring me to say they wanted some, they had to pay. That was meant to be how it worked, but it didn't really. They're not very good at paying, and that's probably the toughest part about wholesaling. But we wholesaled for probably about 12 years only. And I think through the 80s and early 90s, there was a really great, strong market of multi-brand boutiques. And that was a fantastic market. It was enough to sustain a business in working that way. And then we decided after about 12 years, because I met my husband a couple of years after moving to Melbourne, and he joined the business, so that was really great to have that kind of financial backup to help me with running the business, because it was just getting out of hand. I was having people buy the clothes but no one paying, and that typical scenario. So we decided to open a store, which to me was a wonderful turning point. It gave me great focus on understanding what customers wanted, and really that changed how I did things. It was a really nice connector to know how to be better at what I did.
And of course that was really, for many Australian designers, that was the way they were able to succeed, by being vertically integrated, or indeed taking out the middle person so that you were able to get a little more profit by retailing.
Yes, definitely.
And so so you went from wholesaling then to retailing, and also wholesaling as well?
Yes, and we still wholesale. It's much less now, but I still actually value the feedback. I have probably about 25 accounts around the country I sell to, and I'm grateful. I think it's always important to be grateful for everything. I'm grateful for their business. I learn a lot from them. I really enjoy the people I sell to, and these store owners are successful, because only the successful ones have stayed around. So I learn a lot from them. I think, staying in your own little bubble can be good, but, I learn a lot from the people I wholesale to. So we've got wholesale, our retail, and we're now doing online. It took me kicking and screaming, and I can see my store manager in here who was very insistent we must go online. I can't touch and feel and pin and talk to the customers when it's online, but it's actually been quite successful. I see the benefit.
So the range goes online, and so you sell. And do you find that customers want to come into the store as well, or are they old customers, and so they know your sizing and they know what fits and works?
It is there's a lot of research done online, and then people will come in if they don't know the label. But we've got a very broad customer base of corporates and women that travel and who've bought the label before, so they will very confidently order online, and it's growing and it's getting bigger and bigger. And that's a great thing, but I think it's still primarily a good online store or website is creating the research, so people will research and then come in.
Yeah. And in Melbourne we have two consumer-based fashion events, Melbourne Spring Fashion Week and Melbourne Fashion Festival. You've obviously participated in those. Do you think that has an impact?
Oh, incredibly so. I think I am the only designer who has participated in every one of the Melbourne Fashion Weeks, right from in your early days. Excuse me. So that's been really exciting. And what I love about the Fashion Weeks is the excitement it creates within the whole city. So even though we've got Melbourne Spring Fashion Week at the moment and it's very city-based, just the whole feel of the event permeates throughout the industry. I've got a lot of clients who work in the city, so they see it, so they come to me because it reminds them that they need, it's spring fashion, I've got the races coming up, I'll come and, come shopping. So I think the effect and flow-on effect of it is huge and essential. And again, as a designer, an independent designer, I'm so grateful that the government and the City of Melbourne see the value in that. Because it's hard to put your finger on it, on how much it creates, how much business it creates, but it really does. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that benefits from it. So I think they're wonderful. They put our city on the map.
And the challenges facing the fashion industry, what do you see as the main ones?
Oh, I think there are a few. I think sometimes too many things going on, like when I see young designers starting out now, you've got online and you've got social media and you've got wholesale retail, you can't do it all. And I see a lot of them trying to do it all. And I feel, you have to kind of pick what you do and do it well and do it consistently. And don't try and be everything, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I went to so many business seminars in, the early 2000s that would say, oh, if you're not online or if you don't have, a Pinterest, you're going to die. Your business won't survive. And I think, no, actually, I've seen a lot of businesses around me, unfortunately, close down. I think they were doing too much. Probably had too many people doing all their social media and doing all of those things that actually wasn't generating enough turnover of clients. So I think that's a challenge these days. From the day of just making a dress, popping it on the rack and it's selling, it is very different now. So I think staying focused and targeted as a young label starting out is important. Some of the other challenges are, I love the whole push of growing our independent and entrepreneurial spirit, and I think it's something I'm so passionate about because that's how I started. The environment is different now. We have a lot more regulation, and I worry that young designers coming out of sewing in your garage like I did is probably illegal now. There's restrictions and there's a lot of red tape and regulation and brought in the effort to prevent exploitation, which is crucial, and we need to make sure that it's an ethical industry. But in some of the regulation that's been brought in has actually stagnated the possibility of producing and manufacturing on a small level in the country. And I worry that a lot of young designers aren't aware of a lot of these things, and I would probably bravely say that I think about 80% of young designers these days are probably breaking the law. And it's a really dry subject and a really boring subject, but it's important to know because there is rules and regulations there that mean you can't sew from home anymore as a contractor. So it's tricky. So that's a challenge too, because as much as you feel you want to just whip up a few dresses or get a friend to come and help you and she can sew it at home and at night time, you're not really allowed to do that anymore.
And I think it's interesting. Obviously, you as a designer working at a particular level. It's nice to perhaps also. It's also interesting to talk to Mark, and we're going to talk to Mark now, who's the CEO of Jeanswest in Australia, and Mark's had almost 40 years' experience, so even slightly longer than you, Lisa. Both here and in the UK. He worked for some of the biggest names in the retail space, including Arcadia, Top Man. He developed the George range for the Asda supermarket and was MD at Littlewoods, the biggest mail order business in the UK at the time. Mark's been working in Australia for 8 years and was headhunted by Target to bring his wealth of UK experience to Australia. He joined Jeanswest in 2011. So Mark, the first moment you realised you wanted to work in fashion?
Yeah, well, I didn't really ever want to work in fashion. It was just a mistake.
A 40-year mistake.
Yeah, absolutely, a fantastic mistake. I went to art college thinking I wanted to be an art teacher. I did the sort of end of the second year when you go into a classroom, and I had 30 kids. 3 wanted to paint, the others wanted to paint each other. And I decided it wasn't for me. So I looked for something else to do, and I found there was another course I was going to go and do and continue my studies, but that was 4 months away. So I thought, find a job for 3 months, take a month's holiday, start the new course. I walked into an agency, as you could in those days, and they said, yes, here's a job. It was pretty good in those days. And it was being an allocator or a stock controller for Burton Menswear. I thought I was going to do it for 3 months, but I left 19 years later because I just found this fantastic business, that it was creative, it was logical, it was fun, you could earn money, all the things when you were a young kid that it was just, and the guys I was working for were driving the most amazing cars. So there was all of that going on, but I fell in love with it, and I have ever since.
And we've heard a little bit about the way in which Lisa works. You're the CEO of a business that has 200 stores, 200 plus stores.
Well, I don't
I
don't even know how to thread a sewing machine, so that I've got no chance to do anything like that. I guess, as you say, it's a big business. We've got 200 stores, we've got about 100 people based in South Yarra. with everybody in the business, about 1,500 people work in the business. My role is really to paint the picture, to create where we're going, what do we want the brand to stand for, how do we want to do what we do. And that's really important because it's not just about the product when you're running a retail business, it's about what do those stores look like, what's the customer experience that you want to have. And that's great. I can have all those ideas. We can discuss it as a management team, can discuss it. But how do you get that out to 200 stores? Where I've got stores in Kalgoorlie and I've got stores in Nelson and in Invercargill in the bottoms. How do you get that message across? And I think that part of my challenge, if you like, is to make sure that all 1,500 people know exactly their part they've got to play in the organisation and where we're going, and that they're all on that same path. So that's what I do.
And do you see a difference between the stores in Melbourne and the stores in Kalgoorlie?
Yeah, and this is why Australian businesses can beat the internationals. Because before I came to Australia, I thought it was all sand and skippy and, home and away. And I didn't realise it got cold. I didn't realise it was so cold. I thought I'd left all that behind. But if you sit in London in Topshop or in Stockholm, or you're in Aruna, which is where Zara is, you kind of think the same thing. But the difference between Hobart and Kalgoorlie and Perth and Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney are very, very different. And I think that's where we have got the edge, being here, that we can localise our businesses. Those customers have different tastes. Clearly the climate changes quite quickly as well. And it's not this big mass, it's lots of small countries, all happens to be in the same place. If you're in London, you treat Europe very differently. France would be different to Germany, would be different, and that's quite easy to understand. I think in Australia, when you're an international looking in, you don't see that.
Mm. One of the things I think, obviously, recently there have been some high-profile closures of stores. Willow, the brand, closed last week, and I think Seduce, the fashion chain, also went into receivership. GPT put them into receivership, the landlord. Is this the most competitive period in fashion that you've seen?
Yes. In 38 years, yes, it's the most difficult I've seen. I think I was quite fortunate because I left the UK just as the recession was really starting to bite, and Australia was still on a boom. The government gave out lots of money for people to go and spend, and that kind of really kicked it off for another 3 or 4 years. But now since then it's really got very difficult, and I think that's for a number of reasons. As a retailer, costs are rising all the time. Manufacturing costs are rising, store rents are rising, wages are rising, all those things. But with the introduction of some of the new brands coming in, prices are falling. Mm. So how do you have rising costs on one hand and what people are expecting to pay for something going, and that doesn't work in economics point of view. Mm. So I think there's a lot of change going on in the business at the moment. Australia's retail's at a very exciting place. It's going to be very rocky for a lot of people, I think, and quite bumpy for some retailers. But I think once you get through this, you'll come out much stronger on the other side.
And what about the people you employ? You obviously are interested in education. Do you employ a lot of young people who've gone through fashion colleges?
Yeah, we do. We've, part of the work that I do with RMIT, we've been running internships and doing a number of bits and pieces. A number of our people have actually started off in stores. Mm-hmm. So they kind of finished their qualifications. They've always worked in a store. But we've got quite a few of our product people who've worked in stores and come through that ranks and worked that through. That really helps because they understand who they're making products for. They understand who they're selling to. They understand their customers, and that ground knowledge is really invaluable. But as a business, we decided earlier this year that rather than do the charity thing that everybody else kind of does, where you're kind of in a fortunate position to write a cheque at the end of the year and hand it over and put the logo on your thing and think you've done the charity thing, we decided we wanted to support education because there's a number of people in our organisation who've got huge experience, huge skills. Well, let's go and share it. And we've chosen to go and share that into education at various colleges, various universities, even schools, just share our knowledge and help people, because I discovered this industry 38 years ago, but nobody ever told me about it. No one talks about the fashion industry at school. Yes, you can be a designer, but there's 20 other jobs out there that nobody really knows anything about. There's a fascinating careers for people. So I'm on a one-man crusade to get people to understand there's a great industry out there.
Great. And what about manufacturing? You would manufacture overseas?
Yeah, most of our product is made overseas. It's all made in China. We haven't ever gone outside of China. Partly that's because we were owned by a Chinese company. But just recently, the back end of last year, we decided to a campaign we called Bring It Back Home. So we started to try and find some Australian manufacturers. It started off with a T-shirt range, which was 100% Australian. The cotton was grown in Australia, it was knitted in Australia, it was printed in Australia. Even the swing ticket card was Tasmanian wood pulp. I mean, we went to the nth degree that everything on that product. And we got such a fantastic reaction from customers saying, you know, this is great, we want to do it. We followed that up early in the year with a menswear collection that was made throughout Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney. And then just recently we've done a 100% wool, Australian wool campaign during the winter. But I will say, that was probably more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I thought making a pair of jeans around the corner in Melbourne would be quite easy, but it's easier to make them in China than it is around the corner. And a lot of that's to do with the fact that the knowledge and the experience that you need doesn't exist. It's gone. And that's a real shame. But we're continuing to do that. And the good thing is that those handful of businesses that we've dealt with, we've been talking about it, but they've had inquiries from other businesses, some of our competitors, to do the same thing. So hopefully we've kicked off a bit of a return to home.
Great.
And so there is potential for manufacturing, and economically, the manufacturing here can work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it depends on the exchange rate. But at the moment, it does make economic sense to make it here as well. Not massive, but little collections. And the interesting thing is customers are really valuing the fact that it's made locally. And they're prepared to pay more because they can understand where it's come from, or we can celebrate the fact it was made in St Peters or it was made in Brunswick or wherever. And that's worth something to customers, knowing that traceability of where that product has come through, where it's come from, being able to follow it. And we were really fortunate that we had a couple of stores very close to the sewing place in St Peters in Sydney, and also in Adelaide where we had the men's boots coming from. And the team members in those stores were so proud of the fact that was made around the corner, and the customers were coming in, they were talking, and even people were coming in saying, you know, yes, I actually made those shoes, and you know, I wanted to come and see what they look like. So that really gave it a good sense of community, and I think that's
which
important.
is great, because you sort of you imagine that works at a you know, a luxury level, but obviously this is more at a lower price point, a mid-market point. Yeah. And so do you think that Australian fashion designers or Australian fashion companies or labels can compete on the world stage?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. And, you know, Australia's a really cool place. And it's probably the most trendy place out there at the moment. And lots of people who don't live in Australia think it's really cool and want to come here. And I'm glad I made the move myself. So actually, the opportunity for Australian designers is huge at the moment because it's wanted. It's the place to go. The other thing is, for years, mass market has copied everybody else. And so the teams would go on a plane, they go shopping in London, they go shopping in New York, they go shopping in LA, they go back to Hong Kong, drop off the samples, and that'll be arranged. You can't do that any longer. It's not the way to do it. So you've got to change the way you go out there and do that. And some Australian designers have made great success overseas. The sun rises here first, so why aren't we first with fashion?
Good point. Thank you, Mark. Next, I'd like to introduce Cassandra Wheat. Cassandra is an independent fashion designer and part-time teacher at RMIT. She founded the label Chorus with her high school textiles class friend Louise Pennell and graduated from RMIT. She works she's worked in both niche and high street labels across men's and women's wear. Leaving Melbourne, she undertook a Masters of Fashion Design at the Daynes Academy in Milan before moving to Amsterdam to design for her long-time heroes, Victor and Rolf. She's currently undertaking a PhD in fashion and looking at the future business models within the fashion industry. So, Cassandra,
yes.
The first moment you realised that you wanted to work in fashion or be a fashion designer?
Yeah, I think I have that stereotypical that you read a lot, in that my whole family sewed. My great-grandmother was a dressmaker and my grandmother sewed all my mum's clothes and my mum sewed all my clothes. So I grew up surrounded by don't you dare use those scissors kind of mentality. And always having clothes made for me. So I think, I was always knew I wanted to do it. I think since I was very small, there's sketchbooks from primary school of me designing horrendous bike shorts and sloppy T-shirts. And even in grade 6 in primary school, I knew I wanted to go to RMIT to study fashion. So that's when I was 12, which I made happen, So very early.
And a Melbourne girl who goes to work for Victor and Rolf. That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience.
So that was a bit of a journey, I suppose. I had my undergraduate from RMIT and I worked in store at Country Road and then moved up into working as a menswear designer in Country Road, so I took that pathway. But just got a bit bored and frustrated with the aforementioned design development process that was happening at Country Road. And it wasn't what I expected to do after my RMIT education, so I left the country and I travelled for a while and tried to sort of regroup and ended up in Italy and doing the masters, and I was on a holiday in London and saw a internship competition to win an internship at Victor and Rolf and at the Barbican when they had the House of Victor and Rolf at the Barbican Museum, which is an excellent exhibition. And I entered that competition and won, so I went from Milan to Amsterdam. And just right place, right time, and I think also harks back to my education in that I had a lot of different skills that a lot of the other interns didn't have, and so I got given a job. And I was very lucky because it was just at the beginning of the financial crisis, so I was incredibly lucky to get a job, and I worked there for 3 years in various design roles, and it was an excellent experience.
And Victor and Rolf obviously are going to be having a big exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria in October, which is exciting. Victor and Rolf, of course, have had a ready-to-wear, men's and women's ready-to-wear. They have a very beautiful perfume, Flower Bomb, and a couture range. But I understand that they've ceased producing a ready-to-wear range.
They've gone through. I think that they're actually a really good casing point for the challenges that the industry is facing in general in terms of this state of overproduction that we're in, where so many of designers in Europe had got trapped thinking they needed to do all this collection. So they were doing 2 pre-collections, 2 women's wear ready-wear collections, 2 menswear collections. And at the time I was working for them, they weren't doing couture. They started in couture, and they basically, I haven't spoken to them personally, but I could tell designing for them that their heart was never in ready-to-wear. It wasn't how they started, and perhaps it's a bit like what Lisa said, to pick your skill and focus on it. They lost track of that. They got bought by Only the Brave, which is the diesel holding company, who pumped a lot of time and money into them and tried to do with them what they were doing with Margiela, which was making that a very commercial global business. But it just didn't work with their love and their intention, and so they've since pulled back to what could probably be described as being a dream factory, perfume and couture that doesn't even really go to clients, it just goes to museums. So
the perfect
but good on them, and with L'Oreal backing them so they can do it, so great.
And which is interesting because we always assume that in Europe, because there are more people, or in America, because there's more people, therefore it's going to be that much easier. But obviously, those designers found, and other designers find, it's no easier. I
don't think it's any easier, and I think, I'm conscious of being videoed, but I think that it's also another, I'm also researching for my PhD and, really trying to build the foundations of this business and figure out what it means to try and be a successful, commercially viable fashion designer in this market. And I think that Victor and Rolf as well don't care about the consumer and the end user. They are creating beautiful, amazing fantasy and dreams, and so perhaps that style of business isn't suited to them. And so it's not necessarily, I don't think, about being over there or being over here. I think it's about sticking to what you aim to do and, following that through and not trying to split your expectation too far. But,
And so your label is trying to develop a new model for developing ranges. And I think what you talk about too is that when larger companies or when designers that need to continually do ranges, whether they have to do they have to do an autumn-winter range, they have to do a spring-summer, they have to do a resort range, they have to do, they just have to keep on doing a diffusion range, and it really destroys so many designers. The Galliano, the Alexander McQueen scenario, basically those people were destroyed by the pressure of fashion. So your model, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're thinking about?
I suppose, and though that situation happened because of fast fashion and consumers getting used to this speed of having constantly new product all the time, and that being their expectation, and then these luxury fashion houses getting confused that they needed to keep up that pace as well, which is, I think, now that we seem to have hit, at least in the fashion media, a bit of a crisis last year where everybody started to realise that this is maybe not the way to go as an industry. But the advent of digital turn, it's people's attention spans are so much shorter and people do want newness. So when you're a tiny brand like Chorus is, we started in the traditional way of two collections a year, and we just realised very quickly that we couldn't compete on those digital platforms because we didn't have newness. We only had one story or two stories a year to talk about, and without a big L'Oreal backing us, it just wasn't going to work. So we needed to find a way that we could innovate and have constant newness, but with principles that felt like we could handle it. So kind of bringing in a more slow fashion approach to that as well, and that we just make an outfit per month, and we don't actually produce stock anymore. And that's another big, massive issue challenging the industry currently, is this overproduction. Everybody, because they want newness all the time, is producing more and more and more all the time, and then all that does is get super short sales period discounted so that you can move on to the next thing. And we were getting sucked into that, and when your cash flow is so tight, you can't be affording to invest in stock. So we had to find a way to stop investing in stock that we didn't know that someone wanted. So now or with any sales plan or etc. So now we release an outfit per month and we take orders on it, and we only produce those orders. And so that has actually solved a few of those problems, but
And so a customer goes online, sees the new outfit for August, and then they come and see you, or they contact you, or send their measurements.
There's still a lot of teething problems. I can see my business partner laughing. Yes, there's a lot of teething problems. We were trying this year to be a purely digital business, and what we found is that that's not possible. And I think it also goes back to what Lisa was talking about, in that people want that physical interaction with the clothes. And at the moment we're on such a tiny scale that we're working with a really loyal client base that trust us from knowing us, and so they know what they're going to get from Chorus, and we're trying to find a really good streamlined way of getting their measurements. But definitely we're going to need to get a physical space soon, because they do need to come and see you. So we thought maybe they wouldn't. We thought we'd try. We tried. There you go, for anyone thinking that, there's a tip. But I think trying to find the balance between the digital and the physical is the trick.
That sort of physical and digital is also interesting, I think, for talking about students. And you talked about growing up with sewing machines, and talked about patterns and that sort of the Sunday afternoon patterns on the floor surrounded by fabric, and the idea of cutting and making. But many of the students that are coming through universities would never have had a sewing machine in their house.
No, and I think the literacies are really different. It's interesting though, because I feel like visually they're very literate, so you'll get them coming in like their folios or their ways of collecting images is incredibly sophisticated, because they've grown up in that environment. But then for me, even in the last 5 years, I think I've been teaching, this is my 5th year this year, watching them change over that period of time, even that their ability to then translate into 3 dimensions is not as good, and they're kind of, the one that gets me all the time is the kind of really true interest in exactly who that designer is. They're more interested in the mood and the atmosphere, and so then they'll make this beautiful page in their folio, and I'll say, who is that by? Who is that by? Oh, I don't know, they're anonymous, it's on Pinterest. So I just think, what designer wants to be anonymous on Pinterest? None of us. But it's interesting, but I think that they definitely have much stronger skills in some areas than others,
And when you're talking to students, I mean, do you get the sense that they see their future here, or do they see that they would like to work overseas, or is it a mix of, obviously it's a mix of those?
There's a mix. A lot of them have the eye on the overseas prize, and but a lot of them, I think, see that as a pathway or a part of their journey, and then will come back and start their own thing. And a lot of them, want to start their own enterprise. And I think RMIT is pretty good at giving them the education to do that. But yeah, there's definitely a mix.
And also, I suppose, as Mark said, the number of different careers or different jobs within the fashion industry. Yeah. Do you see is it changing?
I think that, I mean, obviously I teach in a specific program at RMIT, and we offer so many different programs, and the program I teach, we specifically pitch ourselves as design education, but definitely our graduates don't all work in design. They go into really different areas of the industry, but coming in, and I teach first year a lot, they really focus on becoming a designer, but they have very limited understanding of what the roles of a designer is or what they would even be doing, and they really lament when I harass them about technical drawings and explain to them if they want to be a designer, their first role in the industry as a design assistant will be doing technical drawings. So they have I think, as anyone does, as I did as well, a kind of one idea of what that might be to be a designer. But, yeah.
So next we'd like to speak to Robyn Healy. Professor Robyn Healy is the head of the School of Fashion and Textiles at RMIT University, Melbourne. Robyn's been involved in fashion education for as long as I've known her. Her first career was as a curator, and her second career as an academic lecturer and now head of school. Robyn was, when she was at the National Gallery in Canberra, famously, I think, discovered or purchased a very important collection of garments which turned out to be the original of the ballet routes. Is that right, Robyn?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Which was, so in Australia we have a very extraordinary collection of costumes from the ballet routes that Robyn acquired. Also, more recently, I worked with Robyn on an exhibition of an alumni of RMIT, although only a 6-month alumni. Is that an alumni? No.
Yes,
Sort
they're
of.
all ours. They're all ours.
A fellow called Lee Bowery, who was a wonderful fashion designer, and we had an exhibition during Melbourne Fashion Festival of his work, and from that collection 2 garments came into the collection of the National Gallery of Victoria that Robyn was then the curator. One is a fabulous costume that he wore to the opening of Lucian Freud's exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, a very famous and well-publicised outfit, which is now in the collection of the National Gallery, and another garment which Lee's widow, Nicola, donated to the gallery. So now, of course, you are working in the world of education, but the moment that you first realised you wanted to be involved in fashion?
Yes, okay. Fashion instincts. I'll say I've always had fashion instincts. From the age of probably 3 or 4, I've always liked dressing things and myself. So I used to always dress up in my mother's clothes. I can remember when I was 4 wearing a gold lame dress. I have to tell you now, I never wear gold. And I put a very large bra over the top, so this is pre-Jean-Paul Gaultier. And used to parade around in outfits like that. I then would proceed to dress anything in my sight. It's interesting that I then became a curator and continued to dress inanimate people and do whatever. But when I was quite young, my mother took me to an exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria called The Lady of Fashion, and it was when the Schofield collection was donated to the National Gallery of Victoria. And I was horrified by these decapitated bodies I saw with these very strange shaped 19th century garments. And it stayed with me for a very, very long time. And when I studied at ANU, and I studied a fine art degree where I was focusing towards doing something like curatorial studies, that never left me. So when I applied for a job at the National Gallery of Australia, it was the Australian National Gallery then, in drawings, Unfortunately, I was very bad at being interviewed because I said I hated Australian drawings. I found them very, very boring, and I was far more interested in textiles and fashion, and I couldn't stop talking. And by the time I finished, I thought, well, that's it. I'm never going to get a job anyway. I was only 21, so to excuse the age there. And they said, we've just bought a fashion collection. Would you like to be the curatorial assistant? And that's where it all started. So I then became the inaugural curator of Fashion and Textiles at the National Gallery of Australia, and then I moved on to become the senior curator at the National Gallery of Victoria. So I've always had this dressing thing. Then I did my PhD at RMIT, and because I'd always been very interested in contemporary fashion design, and I'd always taken a lot of risks to convince the board of the National Gallery of Victoria to purchase Leigh Bowery, the first institution in the world to actually put Leigh Bowery into a fashion collection, was a very challenging exercise. So I'd always prided myself on looking beyond just the obvious and also looking at what design can do, and in terms of identity and bringing people together in weird and wonderful ways. I saw there was a great capacity in fashion, and as a curator that was one of the things I found very interesting. But coming to RMIT and starting a PhD, again, reflecting on my own work and the role curation plays in public dissemination of sharing. How do you learn about things? What happens when you enter into a museum? I started teaching, and I actually found that so exhilarating, and that there were a whole lot of people there that all had totally different ideas about things. So you would get into a classroom and you would say one thing and the whole room would just turn on you and say, well, what about this? Blah, blah, blah. And so it would go on. So I wasn't a theoretical teacher. I worked in studios, so I also would be in creative studios. So again, that idea of this incredible talent in the room, no rules, just into what could you do. So that can be quite hard. Like in a first year actually is quite disciplined. Everyone has an idea that they're going to be this particular designer. They see a nice neat box. By the time you get to fourth year, they're totally liberated, very challenging in terms of what they want to become or what they believe fashion can do. So there are very different moments, but I found the environment in the university and in the fashion discipline incredibly stimulating. And also that in fashion, going back to some of the things that Mark said, the wonderful thing about fashion in Australia, and I say this all the time, that we don't have the baggage, the historical baggage of places like Paris and New York. That in fact here we can be pioneers. We don't have to worry about what happened 100 years ago in this massive tradition, which can be such a burden. If you talk to students studying in Paris, it is such a burden. The burden of Paris on you can actually make you feel defeated before you even start. Here, people find it quite surprising that we have graduates that will just go out and set up their own enterprise. They're not going to go and pick up pins for someone or do whatever. There is this incredible spirit. Now, sure, within that you'll get more successful graduates than others. And again, we are looking, I'll talk a bit more about the shifts in education in a moment. But in fact, to have that bravado, which I think is something that we just lose track of. So when we have our students who go and work internationally or interns during their studies, the one thing, the feedback we get from many of the big names, from Alexander McQueen to Martin Bajela, is that our graduates and our students will do anything. They're not precious. They will actually do whatever. So I think in terms of those capacities, that this idea of what a fashion designer does, we're making it up as we go along, which I find very refreshing, that the model in Australia, there is really no model of what it should look like. We do have that pioneering make-do attitude, which means we can sort of get a sense of what it could be, or a bit of this, bit of that. And if we don't see the ideal scenario, we'll just make do with what that scenario is. And I think that's a capacity we really underestimate. And certainly in my role as a head of school, I found this an incredible opportunity, because I can also help people have a belief in fashion, and also a belief in Australian fashion. So one of the reasons, and again, everyone knows I'm going to talk about this, which is the Business of Fashion, global rankings of fashion schools, which is one of my pet topics for obvious reasons.
I don't think that was on the list.
That's right. You knew I was going to say it, so I'm going to say it anyway. One of the reasons why I bring this up is because so often, people, students wanting to study in fashion think, oh, I have to go to Central St Martin's, I have to go here, and so on. So for us, embarking on something like that is a very risky thing because you get peer reviewed across the world, you get your students reviewing you, and
Robyn,
so on.
just to explain, this is a ranking by Business of Fashion.
Business of Fashion, which is an online fashion journal. It's very well respected in the fashion industry. It's probably been going for a couple of years. And there hasn't really been a ranking system for fashion schools. Now, universities can get a bit obsessed by rankings, so I'm not going to say that is why we needed to do this, but I think in a discipline like fashion, we really haven't had an opportunity to reflect on ourselves. So what is the role of education in fashion? What do we actually do? What is the value? What are the sorts of things that are changing, and so on? So an opportunity like that actually starts for you to reflect on that. It also makes people aware that perhaps Australia is actually very good at this, that in fact you don't necessarily need to go somewhere else. Now, the first year we ranked in the top 10 out of 22 schools for our BA, and number 9 for our MA. This year, out of 54 schools, we ranked 17, and not far off getting in that top 10, and 12 for the MA. So people are quite surprised that a school based in Australia can do that, because all the top schools are from those fashion capitals, Paris, London, and of course places like Antwerp. So for me, it's very important for us to think about what that does, in terms of us really understanding the role of education, and also in terms of fashion, how we can grow fashion through education. So people, when they look at where are these big schools, well, we are one of them. There is a lot of good things happening here. So that's the only thing, bit of my plug there, Robert, and then I'll behave now.
I think what's interesting too is this question of the relationship between a school and a city.
Yes.
And also this notion of what makes a fashion capital. Do you think that, and the relationship between RMIT and the city, obviously RMIT just had a fashion show as part of Spring Fashion Week, so
exactly.
That was a very important way to promote your students' work, and a very good show. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So do you think, is that the support of a city obviously it plays an important role in helping an educational institution?
Absolutely.
But what about the environment of a city, or the atmosphere of a city? How does that support fashion designers, or how does it support the fashion industry?
Well, I think again, in a fashion city, looking at the successful fashion cities, you have a mix of those things. So again, going back to having, a vibrant fashion school or schools. So again, you need new thinking, you need innovation. We talk a lot about the current models, but what are the next models? What are the shifts that are occurring? Our students today are incredibly different to what they were 5, 10 years ago. Where they will be in another 10 years, 20 years will be very different again. In Melbourne, we're very fortunate because we have this incredibly fashionable city. We have these big events that support fashion. We also have these clusters of these micro enterprise. So going back to these different models, we have some highly successful small enterprises. We also have, retailers that support back. We have people that actually participate in fashion. All you've got to do is share the numbers for Melbourne Spring Fashion Week and the Melbourne Fashion Festival to see this commitment we have to fashion. We also do have a lineage in design and in manufacturing, and also in innovation. So where we start to think of the old models of the fashion capital, that's totally changed. I mean, places like Paris and London are going through a massive identity crisis in terms of thinking about how do they retain that status as a fashion capital. Because in fact, you can be in Melbourne and work anywhere in the world. You don't actually have to go to those capitals anymore. So it's really diluted, in fact, what some of those fashion capitals had got their reputation on in terms of where the collections are shown, having a certain type of industry. So for our students today, and also for us to perhaps reflect on in Melbourne, in terms of this word innovation, which is being bandied about, which is starting to look at what does that mean in terms of how we evolve as a fashion capital, and what could this fashion capital here in Melbourne look like. And I think in terms of starting to think about, you know, the role of manufacturing, different types of manufacturing, in terms of, we're fortunate at RMIT in terms of having a research centre where we look at advanced materials and performance textiles. So we are now, you know, in a situation where we have a whole range of new skills and knowledges that we can share with our undergraduates, which will become part of industry here, in terms of different ways of thinking about advanced manufacturing, also in terms of enterprise in developing what are the next models of business practice. Some of the models we have now do not work, so we have to be careful we don't keep going round and round in a cycle. What I would like to see is more of the synergy together with like a university. And in fact, I think RMIT and Melbourne University and Monash are all working very hard to try and pull together this idea of the university as part of a full community, so that we can actually have that innovation as very much part of the centre of the city. The new thinking, the venturous way of looking out. Some things are risky, but you need to take risks to see where the next part of it will go. Otherwise, we'll just continue around and we won't be a fashion capital. We'll be a pale glimmer of fashion. But I think in terms of having a vibrant fashion capital, and these are the challenges all the fashion centres at the moment are facing. Where will we be next? What will happen? What are the new jobs in fashion? What are the new ways of communicating fashion? I mean, things are moving incredibly fast. And
one
this
of
is where the
one of
challenge
the great
is.
things, I suppose, with RMIT was it 5 years ago, the fashion school re-amalgamated with the textile school, because there was for many years a separation between the fashion design course and the textile design course. But now with your move to Brunswick, that's been brought together. So obviously, and because of the huge advances in technology with textiles, that becomes very important, I suppose, also as a growth area.
Well, you have now design, technology and enterprise together. And what I think we need to think about with the new student is the new student wants to have more control over what they actually study. So the sorts of standard degrees that universities have been producing are no longer that attractive. Students want to come in and be able to put together their own type of degree. So some of this here, some of that there. There also is the growth of this sort of, you know, multidisciplinary person who has a range of sets of skills. So I think in terms of seeing that evolution, that's what we're working on, and how do you not dilute a discipline but also allow to have those different facets. So in terms of a generalist fashion degree, you could have the enterprise, the technology and the design, and then you go into your specialised degrees and what you have in those. So you start to just build the capabilities slightly differently. And also in terms of when we think of how we support a fashion industry, is we need to also think about lifelong learning. That you just, and often graduates will leave with their degree, then we'll get feedback 10 years later like, oh, what I did there hasn't really been, well, it's changed. So it's about this evolution, that in terms of this lifelong learning, come back, stay in the network. You know, what are the ways that we can continue growing that? So I think that's also something. So just because you finish a degree, that will not give you all the answers. The education part is lifelong. You know, we know from experience, you know, Lisa, Mark, Cassandra have all talked about that those experiences. Internships will give you so much, but when you go in there, but then you might want to come back. That, you know, there are different models of practice. So how do you keep part of that community? Because that's how you get, a rigorous fashion community.
And I suppose how you indeed create that fashion capital.
Or how you maintain and grow that capital.
Yes.
And I think we're in a good position because, again, we don't have that baggage that a lot of those traditional fashion capitals do have and are struggling with trying to maintain an identity in a highly globalised world.
But enough questions from me. I think now it's time for you to have the opportunity to ask our panellists, Lisa and Cassandra and Robyn and Mark. So are there any questions from the room? Yes, we have one over here.
I'm kind of curious in terms of education in Australia for fashion. Do you see in the future that if it does become more of a fashion capital, in quotes, that there would be space for also international students to come get an experience, perhaps from not Paris or New York, but maybe like South America, and then take some kind of program that would be keeping these kinds of things in mind when they can go back home with new knowledge and
I think that question is to Robyn, but I understand, isn't education Victoria's largest industry?
We have international students, and we also have exchange programs. Yeah. So international students from a number of universities, including South America, can study for a semester as part of the exchange program. So that's definitely there. So that option's there. So maybe have you got a specific university you're attached to?
No. I was more curious in terms of the education that an international student would get. Would you expect or want them to stay within Australia, bringing maybe something else on board, or go back with, I don't know, maybe you don't have thoughts on this, but
depends. It depends on them. So usually when a student comes, you construct a particular program for them, depending on where they're from and their expectation of their international experience.
And, schools vary so much across the globe, and we have students that come here and their eyes are so their eyes are made so wide open by our type of education compared to the one they were in, and they're very determined to stay. And so, I think it just depends on their experience and what they take from it and where they want to be.
And I think, Robyn, this year, is it the second year that there's been a master's course or master's degree, which is
We've got two master's programs. This is the second year for the Masters of Design in Fashion. And then we've got a Masters of Fashion Entrepreneurship, which was renamed several years ago. That has a large percentage of international students in it.
And they're students who haven't necessarily gone through RMIT,
no,
so they've come from other institutions.
Yeah.
Any other questions? And over here.
I have one place, so I'm just wondering if you manufacture in Australia.
100%. Yes, it's very important to me, and I know it probably is easier in China sometimes, but it's something I'm very passionate about, and I can see huge growth. There's a lot more people, a lot of other designers who are seeing the value in it. A lot of my clients now make such a point of saying, and they're discerning, they've got money, they can choose European labels, but they are choosing to support a designer that manufactures in Australia. It is hard, but it's really important, and I would love everyone, especially when they start out, to manufacture in Australia, and then keep the factories supported and keep them working, and then we can grow it back again. And like Mark was saying, I didn't know that about Jeanswest, and I think that's fantastic. And I think if we have a need, and it is such a complex thing, I love to think that our immigration that's coming in, because I've been making 33 years, and it was the Greeks and Italians, and it was the Vietnamese. There's going to be another wave of entrepreneurial immigrants that will come in and be a part of this wonderful industry.
How did you manage to switch, when you switched from wholesale to retail, when you started having this direct feedback from customers about your collections, and you could put this in design straight away, how did you manage to keep your brand identity and not to be influenced with every single feedback you had? How did you went through the wholesale to retail?
I think it made me a better designer by hearing what the customers wanted, and I think that's something that you have to be really careful of as a designer, and we were talking about it before. It's when I love the graduate shows, because that is that beautiful butterfly moment of unadulterated, pure creativity that is not influenced by commerciality at all. To make money, to stay in business, and that's what you want to do, you have to know your market, you have to know who you're designing for, and to me, probably the bane of my life is a sleeve. Every customer that comes into my shop, even though they're gorgeous, they've got great arms, they want a sleeve. And to me, that's a challenge, to put a sleeve in a dress that isn't daggy, that isn't, that still keeps the integrity. So it's actually challenging, but the more dresses I can put a sleeve in and it looks cool, the
So
more
true.
sales
So true.
I make. So,
Very true.
So, you know, I think it just made me a better designer, and I don't think I lost my brand identity at all. It was a great help.
And also presumably understanding the product mix that you need.
Yeah.
There's a question over here.
Yes, I had a question about the role of sustainability in the future. Just from the industry perspective, where do you think that's going to come into play, especially with the next generation of younger people who care probably more about sustainability? And also, Robyn, a question for you in the realm of education, whether sustainability or a pathway in sustainability is in the pipeline.
Do you want me to say it?
I think it sounds like it.
Yeah. I think it's a huge new trend that's happening out there. Consumers are becoming aware of wanting to understand where everything comes from, whether it's the strawberries that they're eating, whether it's the meat which farm did that come from. I guess the food industry have kicked that off, but it's clearly then morphed into fashion. I don't think people in our world at the moment, people are not necessarily making a decision yay or nay, but they are building up a trust with a brand, or they are understanding more about it. They're suddenly becoming more discerning. They're wanting to know more about where it's come from. They're quite happy that it's not necessarily made around the corner. They just want to know all the stages and that you're doing the right thing. And I think as long as you are following that through, that's really important. But you have to tell that story, and you have to go out there on the front foot. Rather than being asked the question, you need to be proud of what you're doing and go out there and say that. It's going to be the biggest subject in consumerism in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I'll say something, yeah. This year, some of you might have read about the Copenhagen Youth Fashion Summit that was held. And in that, rather than using the word sustainability, they used the word responsible innovation. So I actually think that's a very smart way of starting to look at what it actually means in terms of a fashion industry. So this idea of responsible innovation, I think, sets up a really interesting dynamic. And as we look at some of the jobs of the future, the one that comes up, of course, is this sort of garbage designer in many ways, in terms of what happens to all the surplus clothes, in terms of suddenly upcycling as a designer will become a major profession in terms of taking up all that surplus.
And it already is, yeah.
Well, it'll be increasingly so. So the Youth Summit addressed the legacy of what all the CEOs of current fashion entities will leave the next generation. So I think that's very interesting. In terms of RMIT, we have sustainability embedded across our programs. We've chosen not to make it a standalone because we believe it has to be part of everything you do. So by highlighting it in a particular way, it makes it like this odd specialisation. We feel it needs to be embedded. So that becomes the conversation. But I have become a bit obsessed with this idea of responsible innovation, because I do think that sets up a very interesting dynamic. And some people get over the word sustainability can get overused, and you know how people just glaze over it. So I think going back and the refresh with responsible innovation is a good pathway forward.
Yeah.
Great. Any more questions?
Hello, thank you for that. It was very wonderful. I'm Yahav, a fellow RMIT graduate and independent designer, and my question is for Cassandra.
Yep.
So you spoke about designing one outfit a month. How do you come to that in terms of, is it trans-seasonal, is it warm, cold, who is it for?
Yes, many questions, many good questions. No, I mean...
It's a little time.
Yeah. Well, Chorus has always made quite trans-seasonal clothing, and we're also quite focused on a kind of very, very, very relaxed approach to corporate wear, more or less. So we've always been making jackets, shirts and pants, and it's a vocabulary that we are continuing to work with across those editions. So there's like a bit of a thread of a DNA, but it has been difficult to start to try and map like across a year or across from outfit to outfit how they work together. And yeah, I think that's just in its trial stages, and for sure not something we've fine-tuned. But yeah, I think it's about knowing what you're trying to do in a broader sense, and then updating that slowly.
And Cassandra, within the outfit, there are different items.
Yes,
like there's
exactly.
A
So
jacket.
it could be like it's anywhere between 1 piece and 4 pieces per month, depending on the month. So yeah.
I just want to make a comment about when I take my students. I'm a textiles secondary teacher, and when I go to Top Designs, I always see the most wonderful folios are from students from very privileged independent schools, which I actually experience, but I teach in the government sector. Can you give me some advice as a textile secondary teacher to help my students with their hopes and dreams? Because I really feel that, I look at some of the folios and I know that there's maybe $2,000 that has gone into that folio.
Yeah.
I can answer that one.
You can answer it?
Yeah,
Good.
I can.
I'm hoping you can.
Okay, so some of those so-called privileged schools don't necessarily do their students any justice.
No.
Because all the portfolios look the same. So the scruffy drawing on some, we also interview, so we do cut to the chase there. So often, the laminated pages that cost a fortune does not necessarily show off that student. So we take students from very diverse backgrounds. I mean, we've always prided ourselves in our selection process. And again, we're very conscious of having mixed cohorts. So it doesn't necessarily get you in.
Can I say something?
It is disappointing, though, for the students to see such a high level and such a small representation from the government sector.
Yeah.
Well, again, we don't select.
I know you don't select that.
But I think in terms of the future of
Can
where that goes, I think you just need to. There are different qualities, and I think it's great that those students get to be in that environment. But in terms when it comes to the university, we are quite different in the way we select.
I understand that, but I am concerned that there doesn't seem to be enough opportunities for them post VCE. They'll say, well, I can't afford to go to White House and I can't get into RMIT.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Sure.
They can just skip it and go and get an internship. Not even an internship. It just they don't.
Yeah.
They can just get out there and have a go because I know it's so hard. If it is their passion, and they miss out on going into some of the education places. That should not stop them. They should still have a go.
I just want to say, as somebody that teaches first year all the time and interviews the first years we're really looking for idea generation. It's about how they express their ideas, and drawing doesn't even matter. So they just have to find their own unique way of. And you should see when we do the folio assessments, it's like the sticky things from Spotlight and the pearlized paper. It's a nightmare to us, and I ban it as soon as my first years come into my classroom. All of that is banned. It's a pencil and one folio, and that's it. And so I think, it's just about them working on their idea generation and finding a way to express that it can leap off the page in their folio. And that doesn't mean thousands of dollars of photography or weird backing paper or expensive materials.
And I think now, because online, a lot of the students who aren't because often a lot of those other schools will have special presentations from universities and whatever, but now because of the online capacity, it means if you're really interested in fashion, you can go online and you can see RMIT parades, the Masters portal. So I think now in terms of that communication, if you're a really resourceful student, like with Open Day now, it's very interesting. The numbers are starting to falter because students will find everything they need to know without even coming to see us, because they can get it all online. So the idea of physically going to visit a potential university and talking doesn't necessarily. So it's just a thought in terms of just how that works now.
And as an employer,
There is a question.
as an employer,
I just wanted to add something to that.
Sorry. Don't worry.
Sorry.
Let me just one point. As an employer, we look for attitude and creativity rather than shiny portfolios every time. So it's not about where you come from, it's about who you are.
Yeah.
I have a really odd individual story. I grew up in Mildura. I worked at Jeanswest. Yes. I went to RMIT with a scrappy drawing. And then now I work for Lisa Barron. So.
It's just wonderful.
And I really did look around the room and see students with these beautiful folios and thought I had no chance in hell. So it really is. It's just a passion.
I think that's a very nice way to end our discussion today.
Definitely.
I'd like to thank our 4 panellists. Thank you, Lisa Barron.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Mark Daynes. Thank you, Robyn Healy. And thank you, Cassandra Wheat.